Okay, so does hair dye cause cancer? That is an extremely hard question to answer. Let's talk about it. What's really frustrating about this is that there is not a clear answer. It definitely shows that there's a lot of ingredients in hair dye that are very toxic, and some of which directly cause cancer, okay? However, there's also a lot of other confounding factors, which is what makes actually proving and connecting hair dye use to cancer. It makes it almost impossible to draw that connection. Hair dye has tons of toxic ingredients. We know this to be true. There are some that are non-toxic, like henna. Hairprint doesn't even use dye per se. So for the purposes of this video, let's just talk about like boxed hair dye, right? So there's over 1,000 different ingredients that can be used in like a boxed hair dye product formulation. This ends up resulting in an infinite combination of toxic ingredients or ingredients that like weren't as toxic, but when mixed with another ingredient, they become toxic, right? Some of the most common ingredients in hair dyes are aromatic amines, which are potentially carcinogenic, phenolics and isothioazones, which have been associated with cancer and some pretty crazy allergic reactions. There's also some ingredients that when put together with others, they turn into formaldehyde, and formaldehyde definitely causes cancer, but it's also a tricky thing too. One of the worst ingredients in hair dye is called PPD. All right. It's internationally recognized to have the potential to cause cancer. So firstly, there's that. And this makes it hard because when they're doing studies that they're all in surveys, right? Where they're asking someone, have you dyed your hair? Right? And there's also quality difference. And there's also hair dye companies that don't use PPD here in the United States. Do those cause cancer? Are those associated with cancer? We just don't know. But there's a big difference to someone that is like permanently platinum blonding their hair and then someone getting the occasional balayage every few weeks, right? Secondly, I do want to say there are loads of studies showing associations between hair dye use and cancer. Like so many, I can't even tell you all of them. It would take up like 20 minutes. Also, other lifestyle factors that could potentially also cause cancer. There's also tons of studies showing that salon workers and hairstylists are much more likely to get bladder cancer. Considering the significant risk of urinary bladder cancer, the occupation of hairdressing has been classified as probably carcinogenic to humans by the International Agency for Research on Cancer. And I don't think a lot of people realize that. But there's still other problems as to why researchers can't quite pin down as to whether or not hair dye causes cancer, okay? Hair dye formulations change all the time, and hair dyes might be more or less toxic depending on the color, right? And we don't know enough about specific hair formulations and what that may or may not entail to even deduce which ones are toxic and which ones aren't. And then another thing to think about is that people who are more likely to dye their hair may also be more likely to do other things that might expose them to harmful chemicals, okay? So there was one study specifically that looked at pregnant people and PFAS, and they did find that the use of hair dye increased the risk of certain PFAS in their body. However, people that wore makeup more frequently were also more likely to have higher PFAS in their body. And lots of makeup has had PFAS in their formulations in the past. Okay, now just FYI, a lot of that's been banned. However, in the past, lots of makeup had PFAS, and so was the PFAS in their body from the hair dye or from the cosmetics that they were also wearing. If you like to wear lots of makeup, you're more likely to dye your hair more frequently or play around with your hair color. And that's what makes this really hard. The American Pregnancy Association states that most research shows that chemicals in permanent hair dyes are generally not highly toxic and can be used safely during pregnancy. Moreover, they say only small quantities of these hair dyes are typically absorbed by the skin. And they also found that PPD, right? They also found that up to 84% of the PPD, right, the super cancer causing aromatic amine in hair dye, well, that's estimated to go unused during the hair dyeing process. So there are a few things that are very clear, okay? Number one, your main exposure route from dyeing your hair is through breathing it in and absorbing it through your scalp, okay? In the hair shaft itself, it's really not going to be getting into the bloodstream. So really, it's how long that hair dye sits on your scalp, which also is what makes covering grays that much more concerning because your grays are literally on your scalp, okay? So that's hard. Another thing they have found is that there is a huge racial disparity in that products marketed towards African-American women tend to be the most toxic. And that is horrible. There have been so many reports of this over the course of many years. Nothing has been done. Ultimately, here's what I would say. I'm not gonna stop dyeing my hair. Like you can tell my hair is dyed now. It looks hideous. It's also like I haven't done anything with it. So I literally just got done exercising. It looks like crap. So don't judge me. Okay. However, number one, try and use a hair dye that shows to have less toxic ingredients. You can use the EWG like Skin Deep database. That really helps. Okay. Madison Reed shows to be pretty good, but there's other ones out there that also show to be pretty good. Number two, if you're going to dye your hair, don't leave it on your scalp for too long. And that's so hard when you're doing grays, but like try and keep it like, you know, just try and not have it sit on your scalp. Okay. Number three is you really want to wash it out thoroughly. Okay. That's a really big deal. You also want to make sure that everything is well ventilated so you're not breathing a lot of the stuff in. If you have any cuts or like, you know, abrasions or whatever on your scalp, don't dye that area. Okay. Also don't dye other areas on your face. Only have that done by a professional. I'm definitely going to continue to dye my hair. Right? So, but I'm definitely going to take a lot more precautions when doing so.